you ever read the book 11/22/63 before? Are you familiar with it?
Yes. Oh my
Okay.
God, that book is so weird.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal book. I really enjoyed it a lot. I'm a big Stephen King fan in general. But that book is different than pretty much anything else he's written, and it's just great. I love it. So, speaking of
Yeah,
preventing
it's
the
very
Kennedy
good.
assassination. So, as far as the podcast today goes, it'll be a little bit of a different flavor than what my listeners typically think about. But when I saw your post on Substack, you were thinking about science and the longevity of the universe and the way that things like religion and spirituality have formed you. I was at an intersection where I was really frustrated with what was happening in my life and feeling like, this feels like cursed level blockage. I can't seem to succeed in the way that I should when all of the signs are pointing toward I should be successful right now. Things should be working out for me. And so like my mind went to the really, I think, archaic place of feeling like this is a curse. I'm being cursed right now. And I read your post and it stopped me and got me thinking a little bit about it. So I wanted to talk with you because you're building a platform on Substack. You have paying subscribers. You are trying to create something. I think a brand. Actually, let me ask you to describe what you're up to as far as the Substack and the podcast goes.
Yeah, okay. What I'm up to. That's an evolving question. That's been
Sure.
changing a lot. So I guess you probably need some backstory for this, but I'm 25. I decided not to go to medical school when I was 23. So I had just finished a year of grad school and I had been like pursuing this goal for a really long time and decided on a whim, like a right whim, but I mean, it was a very like
Sure.
moment of clarity uh, time where I was like, oh, wait, this is not for me. And I had already been writing or copywriting on the side
Mhm.
to just for extra money during school. And so I came home with no idea what I wanted to do and kind of like bounced from job to job for the past like 2021 to 2022. But all the while I was writing on the side and I was writing on Medium and all of that. So like fast forward to today and the copywriting thing has scaled some. I'm moving more towards that successful place, but in terms of platforms, I've moved away from Medium some just because
Mhm.
it's so attention fueled and algorithm fueled, and that can be really exhausting for me.
Mm.
And towards Substack because it's more about relationship building, which is
Yeah.
what I care about. That drives everything that I do, whether it's writing or like activism or not having relationships, just like sitting in my house and reading.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where I'm at with Substack. I'm comfortable just me being me, and if the people come, great. If they don't
Mhm.
come, that's okay too. It's not
Yeah.
like I'm not trying to constantly market myself, living and
Mm.
breathing my personal brand type of thing. So
I got you.
yeah.
So what would it be? I'm trying to think of the way to ask the question because you just said you're not out to market, and I'm not asking marketing question, but what level of clarity do you have on what it is that you do want? Like in terms of what would your thing look like, I guess. You said it's evolving.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, and I think this is such a sticky question. I was talking about this
Mhm.
with my mom the other day. Oh, hush, hush. Um, is that we always think there's an ideal job or like the end goal for us, and then when we get there, it's like there's still something missing.
Mhm.
I think people forget that so much. Like for me, I'm like, oh, I would just be happy if I could retire and like paint all day and meditate and go for walks. But I know
Mhm.
still there would be something missing. But I think the closest thing the closest goal for me to that ideal is writing for me. So, and getting paid for it. So that looks like to me, doing most of my writing on Substack and having like a huge following, but
Mhm.
not because I was grinding every day trying to get people to follow me, just And of course, some marketing is necessary,
Sure.
like sharing a post or something, but I'm not interested in making it happen overnight.
Yeah. What
Gonna
kind of
take
dog do you
care.
have?
She's a Bernie Doodle.
Gotcha. Hypoallergenic.
Yes, my boyfriend is allergic.
Yeah, we have a Great Dane named Lyle. Well, he's a Great Dane English Mastiff mix, so he's all giant, and he was supposed to be super friendly, but instead he's hostile towards children of all things. So we have to keep him away
Yeah, they
from.
never turn out like you think they will.
Yeah. Yep. There's a word for him, I guess. He's supposed to be reactive, apparently. So if other people are okay toward him, he's usually okay, with the exception of children. For some reason, he sees unfamiliar children, and he wants to kill them. He's okay with our kids, but any other kids, he'll murder. So
That's Thank you. That's really, I mean, that's not funny. It's a little funny though. Nala's very reactive, if you can't tell. I don't even know what she's barking at the neighbors here. They're
yeah,
not
yeah,
going
right.
anywhere. Come here. I'm sorry. I love you. Have fun out there. Yeah, bye. Poor thing.
So talk a little bit about med school because I had a not a similar situation. I've known for quite a while. I've had a lot of clarity on wanting to be a novelist who makes a full-time living selling novels to readers. That's been clear for me since I was probably 25. And so it's been a good long journey, and I'm not there, getting somewhat closer. But before that time, I've had several transitions in my life where I thought I wanted to do things. I was in nursing school to get my RN, and felt like that would maybe fill a void that I was trying to fill. And then I thought, okay, I'll get a bunch of houses and be a real estate investor, and they can be my patrons of the arts. That's really what I thought. Is I thought that'll be my version of retirement. And then even if I don't sell a million novels, I can still write and not worry about it. And I got to this point where I looked at everything and said, I'm so busy building a real estate portfolio that I hardly write, I hardly read, I hardly do the things I love. I feel like, you know, this is all wrong. Everything is wrong. And so I switched it up 2 years ago, and it's been a really fun, exciting time, a lot of questions, but I imagine maybe similar magnitude to you walking away from grad school. So, or from med school and grad school. I'm interested to hear what that was like for you.
Yeah, and somewhat I'm not doing anything I love part came much later. That came more recently
Mm,
because after I left med school, I had no sense of direction, but I was still left with that need to make money. So
yep.
I felt like to finance whatever dream I had at the time, I couldn't do it like you said, unless I had the money to do it. So there's always this narrative in the back of my head, which I'm now much more aware of, well, if I just make enough money doing this, then there'll be all this time left to do this. And
Hmm.
every day I'm reminded of the fact that the more I focus on something that I don't really care about, that's where my energy is going. Even if I'm not
Mm.
actually putting a ton of time there, it takes so much away from what I love. But to answer your actual question, yeah, so med school for me became a dream when I grew up with epilepsy.
Mm.
I still have it. It never goes away anywhere, but it's under control now.
Yeah.
And uh, I I always love to help other people. I'm a very people-oriented person. I love connecting with people. And as I grew up and tried to define exactly it was I wanted to do or be as I got older, I watched my doctor in action. I shadowed him one
Ah.
summer and
Hmm.
I watched him in action with his patients. And I was like 15 or 16, and I said, oh, that's what I want to be. It
Yeah.
was a good choice for me. I need to be challenged a lot in my job and in my work and in
Hmm.
life. So it was never boring. I was constantly doing way too much. But I loved it.
Mm,
I loved the undergraduate. Well, I hated it, but at times I loved it. I was an EMT, and I originally started doing that just to, as so many other people do, to get clinical experience for med school.
hmm.
And I fell in love with it. The adrenaline,
Yeah.
the trying to figure out what's wrong with people. I mean, it was everything to me. And
Hmm.
what the real moment of clarity was going to grad school, these really hard courses and acing them, but realizing I didn't want to spend the next 2 years sitting in a classroom studying at that same, for that same amount of time, paying to do that. It just, in
Hmm.
one moment, I was like, what a stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
Pay that much money a year just to study these incredibly rare genetic diseases I'll never talk about again to anyone.
Hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So it was about the schooling and not so much. Do you think if you had gotten your PhD and started practicing medicine and going through that whole thing, would you have found the enjoyment again that you saw when you shadowed the doctor?
I don't know if I would have had a soul left to enjoy it. I'm serious. I
Yeah.
mean, and I say that like cynically, I guess, but even just working in the medical profession, patient to patient for a few years, I became very cynical very quickly. And it
Hmm.
wasn't always a bad thing. I retained that level of viewing my patients with humanity that a
Hmm.
lot of people just lose. But the excitement often went away. It came
Yeah.
back, though. I will say that it came back. But I think by the time I made it through residency, I might have just been, I think I would
Hmm.
have cracked it at some point.
Yeah. It's good
Yeah.
to know those things. I think sometimes it's hard to describe too what's happening that we know we need to move away from something. There've been a lot of times in my life where I don't have words for why, but I'm exhausted and something feels wrong.
Mhm.
And trying to make sense of our choices to other people sometimes I think feels a little bit futile. I especially think about my family and trying to justify to them why I'm doing what I'm doing. I've made episodes of this podcast before where I'm trying to just talk to them and be like, hey, this is not crazy. I know you think I'm crazy, but I am not crazy. I may be more reasonable than you are. Have you ever had those feelings before? Like the journey that you're on now, do you ever think I might be more reasonable than the people around me?
Mm, I don't think so, but that's just because I surround myself with very like-minded people.
Hmm.
I have that feeling when I look at like the news. But I just got kind of lucky.
Yeah.
My parents supported my decision. My dad was kind of dad. My dad was kind of just like whatever you do, I'll support you. And my mom was like,
Wow.
thank God. Because she worked in, she was a physical therapist. So she was like,
Hmm.
I'm so grateful you're not going to med school. She
Wow.
hated PT.
Wow.
And she did it for a long time. And she
Okay.
said she wished she had followed her gut and done something else. And I think
Hmm.
she was just grateful I had the clarity at the age that I did. So I just got lucky to be supported by people that understood. And I've retained that level of luck that no one's ever really, I have a very supportive partner. Um, yeah, in that regard, I'm extremely lucky.
Yeah. I think I surround myself with some like-minded people and some people who are very not like-minded. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, which is and even for my whole life has been fairly urban, um, and active, outdoorsy kind of people. Uh, Now I live in a town of 900 in the Midwest, Nebraska. Farmers. I'm surrounded by farmers, and people do not, on the whole, think very similarly to me. I just found out the pastor who lives close by to me, in fact, like across the street, I can look out, see his house, tunes into the podcast from time to time, and that was like, wow, okay. what does he think of me? Because not only is he small town, but I mean, I'm talking about things like I've had podcasts about using psychedelics and that impact on writing and creativity. And I just think, oh, this is not exactly suitable for the local audience that I surround myself with.
Right.
But my wife's whole family grew up here, and so that's how we got here. And there's some amazing things about small town, and some things that I would have different if I could. Let me ask you, in terms of building your Substack, there's that business element to it. Yeah. Or will you never allow it to be business? Is there a moment where you'll say, no, this is something I'm too passionate about to ruin it by forcing it to be my whole living? What's your stance there?
No, I don't think I don't want to take it to that extreme of like, this will never happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think at this point in my life, where my income is other clients that I write for them, I'm not passionate about the writing I do for them. But that's not entirely true. I actually really like one of my clients right now. I love the work I do for her. It's fun. And then I don't hate the other client that I have right now. So like
Mm-hmm.
it's not the worst situation I've ever been in, but it's not like it's not my creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
My newsletter is my creative outlet. And I think at this point where it's a side thing for me, I can't make it, or I won't make it a business thing. I can't make it another part of my day-to-day to-do list.
Gotcha.
I think in the future, though, that's a totally different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your thought process is probably the most foreign thought process to me. And so I try to figure out how to ask good questions, because I sense that you'll be really happy if you get to keep writing for Substack and it just grows over time, and you get to talk about the things that you're interested in talking about and engaging with people who are piqued by the topics that you select. And that 20 years down the road, if that's how it went and it was a really fun side hustle for you, that would be great. For me, if my creative stuff wasn't like everything, I would feel adrift and depressed in ways that I can't even describe. And I didn't realize this until somewhat recently, but I actually don't understand any other way to be. Like, that's the most foreign thing. If I talk to somebody who has that same ambition about anything, then I immediately can talk. But if someone's just sort of like, take it as it goes and enjoy life in the moment, that's confusing to me. I guess, articulating you well, or am I missing something?
No, I mean, you are, you are.
As
I
much as
think,
somebody can know you after 20 minutes.
yeah, I think a big part of it for me is, I had the thought and I lost it. I completely understand what you're saying, where you can't imagine, uh, your life or your job if you're not doing what you love every day. Like day in and day out is what you are passionate about. It's your creativity, it's your creative work. And you can't imagine if like half your day or even three-fourths of your day or most of your day, like me,
Mhm.
is work that you're like good at, but it's not like what
Yeah.
you're, dying for inside. I totally get that. I I really do. And I think so my personal experience with trying to do work that ignites a creative fire in me is that I usually just burn out.
Mm.
And I get really burned out really quickly because I put a lot of expectations on myself around the
Hmm.
success of the work. Is the work
Gotcha.
earning me money? All that
Yeah.
shit. And so that's why I'm like, yeah, one day down the road, but right now I just kind of want to live in peace and learn new skills.
Yeah.
It's nice.
That makes
So
sense to me.
yeah, I completely get where you're coming from. I very strongly relate, and it's not always the healthiest place for me to be in.
Yeah. I don't know if it's the healthiest place for me to be in. I don't think I was necessarily completely articulating you correctly then. I think that you found a place to protect yourself from the downsides of having a really strong ambition. Um, So I guess let's talk about a big question then. If your podcast is going to talk about a big question, let's talk about the big question, the upsides and the downsides to ambition. What do you see as being, if you were going to throw everything in and be that fully ambitious person, what would you have to do to uh, prevent yourself from the downsides that you were just talking about? This is all hypothetical. I'm not actually road mapping with you. I'm big questioning with you.
Um, I would need weekly therapy. I would probably need a life coach or one and
Mhm.
yeah, and or I would need to, I just need to like work with all of my conditioning around fear and shame and guilt. Um, I would need to have savings. I would need to like go on a sabbatical. It would have to be, I think for me, my ideal scenario of like we're going all in is me going on sabbatical. And have you ever seen Love Actually?
It's been a long time now.
Okay, so Colin, what's his face's character goes and writes like this whole book in this little cottage in France and he's all
Mhm.
alone. Yeah, that's what I would do.
Okay.
I would just go be creative alone somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's really not realistic, but this isn't a realistic question. So
Yeah. It's certainly it, like I said, it's a big question thing because I think you have to take all of life and everything that's there. Sometimes I think we get extremely lucky and we don't even know it. I think that's the case with me because my wife takes care of all the practical stuff and she doesn't begrudge me for that, which I check in all the time with her because I kept thinking this must be wrong. This must be wrong. I mean, we look dangerously close to the stereotypical 1950s American family, like, honey, I'm home. Like, I'm up here all day working on my thing. But even worse than that is I'm not doing any chores. Like, she mows the lawn, she does everything so that she can give me this life. And I'm like, are you sure you don't resent me? And she's like, I'll let you know when I resent you. Um, so you're right, it's unrealistic. What I'm doing, nobody else gets the opportunity to do because very few people are in a relationship where the other person just happens to be able to fill the voids. Um, I'm curious, nonfiction book. What do you want to say to people? Because it sounds like you and your newsletter on Substack is nonfiction. What do you want to say to people that you uniquely are able to say? Uh, it's just a chance for you to brag about what you're already writing.
that's $1 million question. I think if I knew what yeah, if I knew what I alone could say, I would already be writing it.
Yeah.
I have like at least three Google Docs with book question mark as the title, and they're like 3 pages long, and then I abandon them and leave them, and I think the most powerful like message I ever heard was there's no unique message, only unique messengers. And
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, I think it's totally true. Every book I've ever read and loved has not been unique at all,
Mhm.
but it's been uniquely delivered and written. And I have no idea yet what my voice even is. And like one of my favorite poets
Hmm.
said that it takes you a really long time to learn what your voice is as opposed to just like you imitating the voice of authors that you really like. And I don't
Mhm.
know if that's true or not, but probably is. And it's probably a lot of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
You know that feeling when you go back home. I don't know how far you are from where you grew up, but you fall back into who you were when you lived there. Have you had that before?
well, I live right now, I live about 30 minutes from where I grew up. I
Mhm.
used to live in Philadelphia. So I would live like 10 hours from where I grew up. That was for 5 years.
Even if you go 30 minutes across town to visit your parents or wherever you grew up, do you notice that you sort of become a different person when you're in that house, in that environment?
I think the closest thing for me to becoming a different person is beginning to relate to my parents again like a child.
Mhm.
I think that's what a lot of people experience when they go home,
Yeah.
especially if they've been away for a long time. And over time, I've begun to relate more and more to my parents like an adult. But it's been very intentional, like noticing
Hmm.
what behaviors are more like child Camille relating to mom and dad, and and how to get past those, because
Mhm.
I'm an adult now and I don't like that.
Yeah,
Do you have that experience?
I do, and I was even thinking of it. In fact, I was just fully diving into what you were saying because I think I still relate to my parents like a child. I still so desperately want them to be proud of me. It's
Hmm.
stupid. It's got to be one of my
But
like
that's not
fatal
stupid.
flaws.
That is like every child wants their parents' approval.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
is yeah.
And I think it brings out some of the like the worst parts of me wanting that. But yeah, it's something I've never been able to conquer. Part of the reason I asked is because you were talking about voice, and I was thinking I just recently reread one of my favorite authors, and I noticed immediately that I was fighting the urge to write in that style again. So I think it's funny the way that influences is that things go in to the hopper, and for a while you can't help but imitate it, and the more you get inside, the less you can see any one personal imitation, but get close to a source of inspiration, and it's all over again. You're just there, like it never left.
What are some of your personal sources of inspiration?
Okay, so writers wise, David Foster Wallace was the reason that I started to want to write. Are you familiar with Wallace?
A little bit. Not,
Okay.
I haven't read any of his stuff. Oh, full disclaimer.
No, no, totally fine. The reason I ask is because I think that he comes with baggage, especially now. It's known that he was abusive to a few of the women he was in a relationship with. And so he, in some ways, has not aged well. I think that there's a long conversation there. So I always just like to front load when I talk about him. I didn't know those things about him. And I also was not one of the lit bros. I ran into an essay of his through a class I was taking in undergrad called Ticket to the Fair. I've told this story a little bit on the podcast, so I'll tell the kind of shorter version of it. But he has a list in the middle of that essay about these foods at the Iowa Fair, the Iowa State Fair. And it's literally a page of foods separated by commas. And when I read it, it gave me this emotional response that was unspeakable. And it made me want to write. And I've always held that. He's verbose in every way. So when I read his work, then I go back and start writing. And it's like these 700 word sentences and parentheticals and footnotes. And it's like, okay, get control of yourself, Jody. This is not you. That's somebody else. How about you?
Oh gosh, I have that's not true. I don't know why I said I have no idea. Um, I don't, the bookshelf is right here. How lovely. Um, I'll just, some of my favorite authors. Well, recently I've been on a huge fantasy kick. So like I
Mhm.
finished the Outlander series last year.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and I also am working on the Game of Thrones series. I like Barbara Kingsolver. I
Yeah.
don't, yeah,
Poison
okay.
Wood
And like,
Bible.
yeah, she's not like a household name unless like if you've read one of her
Yeah.
books and you're like, oh yeah, I know her.
Yeah.
What else? Obviously Harry Potter first book. I like
Yeah.
Leo Tolstoy, but I had a really hard time getting through War and Peace.
Me
Um,
too.
it was such a long book. I rewarded
Mhm.
myself by watching the movie, but I don't know if I would say his writing style influences me necessarily.
Sure.
And I don't think I have like writing influences. I have
Okay.
authors that I love.
Hmm.
Um, and there are a few others, and they're sitting back here, and they
Yeah.
just won't come to my mind. But um,
Do you read essays, memoirists, nonfiction stuff? I mean, you seem to cite quite a bit in your Substack, if I'm remembering right. So there's got to be some philosophers that influence you quite a bit.
yeah, I love Sharon Blackie. I cite her a lot, and she actually has a Substack. She writes about like women's liberation from the perspective of ecology and history and mythology. She's really cool, and lots of feminist authors on my bookshelf in that room over there. I do love philosophy, but like philosophy is harder for me to just sit down and read. It's easy
Hmm.
for me to like sit down and read a fiction book. I can do that in like a day.
Yeah.
And my boyfriend's like, how do you read that fast?
Ah.
But in terms of writing style, so I was thinking the other day about I'm very verbose in my writing style
Hmm.
because I that's just how I think.
Yeah.
And I started to think about like, is that because I read more complex novels growing up? Is
Mm,
it just because of how I think in parentheticals, like David Foster Wallace.
yeah,
Yes.
yep.
I was like, hmm. Like, and I think in like,
Hmm.
89 word sentences. So,
Yeah.
but and I started Googling it because I was like, I was like, does ADHD have anything to do with this? Because I have
Mm,
ADHD.
hmm.
Um, Someone was like, I found a few like Reddit threads about it. I love Reddit. And someone on there was like, well, good rule of thumb, just write a sentence that people don't have to read twice to understand. And I was like, that's the whole basis of literature before 1900 is
Yeah.
sentences that people have to read twice to understand.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't, that's a good question. ADHD is an interesting thing to me. My middle son is on a medication for ADHD. We haven't noticed a huge difference, and my wife and I were both absolutely certain that it wasn't ADHD, but he was also challenging enough that we were like, okay, let's do this medicine thing. We resisted it for quite a long time when it seemed like we would try anything but normal medicine, and then we finally did. I don't know that it's made a huge difference, but I do know that in terms of amphetamines, there's something kind of amazing that it does for focus. And so that interests me a lot, whether you're ADHD or not ADHD. But the long sentences, I agree with you. I think that way. I'm curious about, you mentioned George R. R. Martin, uh, Harry Potter, those kind of things. Those are I think super hyper accessible. Do you ever feel like candy reads or beach reads or easy reads dull you?
Mm, hmm. I don't think so. I really don't. I think they feed like I also don't do beach reads. Is that a beach read? Are those beach? So I get book of the month and I'm like, are those beach reads? Because they're like curated. But I mean,
Mhm.
I read them like very quickly because of
Yeah,
course they're what you said, they're accessible.
yeah.
So for me, I think they feed my imagination. Like it's so hard for me to, for example, like if I picked up Anna Karenina, I wouldn't
Mhm.
immediately be transported into another world.
Yeah.
But if I pick up, Outlander, which is not
Yes.
accessible, I will just say that Outlander was not hyper accessible.
Yeah.
Or
But it's also
even
considered a romance, and in that way, like people expect it to be accessible. It sort of defies
they
accessibility
expect
in this
wrong.
genre.
Yes.
Yeah.
And or if I picked up like Harry Potter, I would just instantly be in another world. So I think
Mhm.
in that sense, it heightens my imagination and it gets my
Mhm.
creativity flowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier Stephen King is among my favorites. I think I did. And I spent a long time wondering, am I like doling myself by reading him? Because all I want to do, in fact, I just finished Mr. Mercedes and I loved it. And I want to just jump right into another Stephen King. And I don't allow myself ever to read consecutive Stephen Kings because I'm afraid it might ruin me or something. So I'm curious because I think that from getting to know you a little bit, I think that you're pretty passionate about diving deep into subjects. And that question of like, am I ever going to sacrifice the acuity of my mind by something that I do? That I imagine is important to you.
Hmm. I mean, yes. I just don't think about it a lot.
Hmm.
Mostly because I'm constantly thinking. I love answers. I like thinking is like my thing. I
Yeah.
can't turn it off. It's annoying.
Hmm.
So I don't really think about it. The acuity of my
Thinking
mind
is my
will go
thing,
away.
and I don't think about it.
Yeah, like that's not a concern that comes to mind
Hmm.
because my brain is just really likes to seek answers. Like a good
Hmm.
example of this is a little hyperbolic, but um like I try and meditate every day.
Hmm.
And like, in September I'm going on this one's not a silent retreat, but like last year it was a silent retreat. And I don't think that I mean if something that sharpens the mind is like reading an advanced book or taking in new information, then sitting in silence for me doesn't dull my mind at all. It, heightens my mental focus and just helps me be more present with the world. And I'm not saying that you said that that like a retreat would dull my mind, but I
Yeah.
would make the argument that that letting your brain take a break,
Hmm.
whether that's by indulging in 5 Stephen King novels in a row or walking in the middle of the woods with no one around, it just gives you time to let your creative juices recharge.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also wondering about, there's something in there. I've been reading John Sandford. I was introduced to him recently. And then I can't think of the author's name. He wrote Silence of the Lambs. I'm reading uh Red Dragon right now. Um, and realizing that in some of the things, I think that they're stereotyped as being Harry Potter would be another one, since you mentioned that. Stereotyped as being simple, or YA for young people, beach reads, accessible, all of these terms. And yet I think what I'm asking, and probably doing a bad job trying to figure out the answer to, is, do I enjoy reading those so much because I'm actually able to pick them apart? Is that what I like? Is my mode to feast on ideas and tear them apart? Uh, and that's where my enjoyment is. And if it gets too hard for me, then I can't do that anymore. If I feel like I'm on equal footing with somebody, uh, reading their work, having a conversation with them, is it less enjoyable to me because I can't manipulate the way that I want to? Does that resonate with you? Are you understanding my
Yeah,
question, I guess?
definitely. Yes, I do. Because I remember when I like, so my thing as a little kid was always reading quickly.
Hmm.
And that's begun again as I've gotten older, and I realized that I actually skip over words.
Ah.
Or I'll skip over words or sentences because my brain can just piece together the
Wow.
idea that they're trying to convey, and
Hmm.
I don't really miss anything. That's how I got through Outlander.
Yeah, that's
But
hilarious. I think I know
yeah,
somebody who's similar to that. She would say that, like, she'll start moving pages really quickly, and I'm like, you're not enjoying it. And she's like, no, I know what's going on. I think
yeah, I
that's
have
kind
to
of a similar
force
thing.
myself. It's the same thing. I have to force myself to stop and slow down. And like if I read a page and I'm like, what the hell just happened? Then I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, I need to go back and read this slowly. But
Yeah.
I think it's probably what I did as a child. But I
Hmm.
started reading Harry Potter when I was 7. So that was way before I cared about like equal footing or books
Hmm.
that were hard, and I enjoyed them then.
Hmm.
That when I became a teenager, I started like trying to read things and successfully reading things that were way harder than ideas I could comprehend. And it did frustrate me. And I think a level of like competitiveness emerged within me.
Yeah.
I wanted to like make myself equal.
Understand. Yes.
Yeah. So like I could like with I remember with Anna Karenina is like the only example of this. That was
Yeah.
one of the novels that was like just way above my head at
Mm.
16. But now I'm like, yeah, Tolstoy was obviously talking about the farmer's plight in late Russia. I know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that makes complete sense to me. I think well, I mean, when I think about the way language is used to communicate ideas, and also just the way
Hmm.
that writing and literature have been used to keep people out of systems and out of
Hmm.
conversations and to include certain groups, I think it's
Hmm.
important to us as humans that we feel included when we read a piece of literature.
Yeah. I love that you say that there too, because I have this internal filter when I'm podcasting, when I think I'm sounding a certain way, and I try to again control how I sound. And I was thinking, I sound like a real douchebag right now. Um, that I just delight in being smart. But it's true. That is something that I take delight in, is trying to be smart. Um, I love research. I love studying. I love devouring information.
I'm the same way. I always have
Mm.
been. And I was so bad at math as a kid. I still am.
Hmm.
It's not my strong suit. I love the idea. I
Yeah.
don't love the practical solving.
Hmm.
But it frustrated me that I couldn't do it, or that
Yeah.
I couldn't do it, but that
Yeah.
I wasn't best one in the class. Drove me crazy.
My oldest son is on the spectrum. We've never had him officially tested, but it's just, when you know. And he's a math genius, especially mental math. He can do three-figure multiplication in his head. He doesn't have to write anything down. You're like, hey, what's 112 times 343? And he just goes like a computer, just kind of settles down for a second, looks up, and then spouts the answer, and you're just like, this is ridiculous. I don't know how he does it. We've tried to have him explain before, and he can't explain. But he's right. You'll check him with a calculator. I'm curious, do you think that I didn't want to touch too much on it, but your epilepsy, do you think it formed or changed the way that you think, or what is interesting to you?
I think I don't know. That's a good question because I do remember being a curious, inquisitive kid
Mhm.
before. I think I remember that. I don't remember. It's kind of blurry. Like I remember diagnosis because I was 7, so I was old enough to have memory. And I remember I have a few memories before, but I was just starting to form memories when I got diagnosed. So it's kind of like, eh.
Mm,
Um, I do think though this is my general personality, I hope.
yeah.
But I think it would be irresponsible to just deny that a neurological disorder
Mhm.
had no effect on
Sure.
me. I mean, of
Hmm.
course it did. Like kids with epilepsy are 4 times as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD.
Oh, really?
Just
I didn't know that.
yeah. hmm
You have the
Um,
auras, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right or anything like that.
no.
No. Okay.
Yeah, my seizures were always nocturnal, so I
Oh,
just
okay.
woke up and was confused.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Just I can even edit this out. I'm really curious. What was that like then? So the seizure obviously does whatever it does to you, but then it wakes you up. So you're sleeping and the seizure happens and
Well, yeah, so and you don't have to edit it out.
yeah.
I talked about it publicly before. But the so nocturnal seizures, so as a child, I didn't start having nocturnal seizures when I was diagnosed. I would just like blink in class. So a teacher would be like, Camille, and I'd be like, and then they'd be like,
Oh.
Camille, and I'd be like, yes.
Hmm.
Um, so eventually this went on kindergarten, first grade. And after like 2 teachers had told my parents, they were like, okay, something's wrong.
Mhm.
And so they took me to a doctor who said it was a tick. And then my parents were like,
Like a nervous
"Okay,
tick, not a,
yeah, mhm,
blood sucking
yeah,
tick. Okay.
yes." And then it wasn't going away. And
Huh.
my parents were like, okay, we're gonna get someone else, like another opinion. Took me to a neurologist. And he was like, obviously, this is epilepsy. And it
Oh,
was.
wow.
And so yeah, that's how the journey started. And then when I was 14-ish, 13 or 14, I started having like just seizures in the middle of the night. So it's just like if you would have a seizure in the middle of the day,
Mhm.
it's the typical seizure, like jerking, shaking, all of that.
Okay.
And my parents could hear it happening because they're very loud, very
Oh, yeah.
violent. Yeah. And
Interesting.
I mean, you start losing oxygen, so you start choking. So
Wow.
I think you'd really have to ask my mom. I was not there.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't remember anything.
Yeah.
The first one I remember, so after a seizure, you have what's called a post-ictal phase.
Hmm.
And so it's very odd. It's like the person's on a repeater machine. So
Okay.
so every 5 minutes you're like, what happened?
And
And
then
then
you,
someone will tell you that you had a seizure. 5 minutes later, what happened? And this goes on for about 45 minutes.
hmm,
And then you like really start to come back. So in my memory, that was always just like one, I remember I was having a dream where I was on a golf course, which should have been an indicator that something was wrong in the first place because I hate golf. And then all of a sudden I was looking up at my dad and I was like, am I dying? I had this like premonition that I was dying.
Hmm.
And he was like, no. He was like, you're fine. You had a seizure, but you're okay. There were some firefighters over there because this was still new and my parents had
Yeah.
called EMS, but they were just standing there, obviously. Now that I'm an EMT now, so I can understand why they were just standing there. There was nothing
Yeah.
they could do. Um,
Hmm.
and then there was like in my memory, there's just black in and out for like some time. You go back
Mhm.
to sleep and you're exhausted the next day.
Wow.
And that's it. And then we finally found a drug that worked for when I was 16, 15,
Okay.
16. And then I was able to get my license just a few years later than my
Wow.
classmates. So in that
That's
respect,
cool.
I'm really lucky. Yeah.
Hmm. So talk to me a little bit, if you don't mind, about the medication. So is there dietary intervention as well, or is it just the medication itself can keep you?
It's just the medication.
That's
So
cool.
I was actually on the keto diet when
Hmm.
I
Oh, really?
started.
Okay.
Yes, when I started on fee, the medication I'm on now, which is just a benzo,
Hmm.
I'm on that with another medication and
Okay.
like another classic anti-epileptic drug.
Hmm.
And I was on the keto diet and I hated it. I mean, I
Yeah.
hated it. My parents hated it. It was
Hmm.
extremely restrictive, and I
Yeah.
was a teenager.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
was miserable. Like I
Yeah.
wanted to be, I wanted to like feel cute and flirt
Hmm.
with boys, and instead I had to eat cauliflower mashed potatoes and
And have bacon
coffee.
breath. No, I know.
Yes, exactly. And I don't think I ever actually had like maple syrup breath, like none of the classic ketosis things, but
Yeah.
coffee became my new dessert because I couldn't have actual dessert.
Hmm.
So I got addicted to coffee.
Okay.
It's better now, but I still drink coffee a lot.
Yeah, I love coffee. I don't think that I would be a happy person without coffee. I am a little bit on a weird part of the spectrum in terms of substances in general. I say to my wife all the time, I really crave altered states of mind. So I like drinking, though I think alcohol has some too many problems. So I've mostly not been drinking of late. But I mentioned psychedelic drugs. I enjoy nicotine. If you could get nicotine without some of the downsides, that would be great. Anything out there, caffeine is awesome. I love it. And I'm not terribly worried about shortening my life. I'd like to have an interesting, fun life. That's, I know, kind of a abnormal perspective, but like what I've been drinking during this podcast is kava. I really have been enjoying kava a lot lately. It's very calming. Um, Sometimes I wonder if that means that something's broken with me, that I can't stand just being in my normal mind, but I haven't delved into it too much.
I don't think so. I don't think anyone's broken. I think humans
Yeah.
are inherently whole. You didn't ask, but I
No, I,
think
I
everyone's,
yeah. No, go ahead.
no, I just think everyone is whole. I mean, I think the world would have us believe otherwise so that we can hate each other and
Hmm.
do the whole us versus them thing. But it, yeah, I think the nature of a human and any animal or any living thing, a
Hmm.
nice rock outside, is just that of being wholeness. I think the myth of brokenness is just that a myth.
Yeah. This is a good place. It's a very circular conversation, and that we're coming back to where we started when you said that we are whole. It made me wonder again, if we're whole, why am I seeking to try to be something? Why is becoming so important to me? And the reason I say it's circular is because I know exactly what I want. I know how to do what I need to do to get what I want. But when I do the things that are supposed to work, they're not working, which makes me wonder, am I cursed? Am I less than? And why, if so? It's the very religious part of me. I didn't actually ask you in this conversation, did you grow up with any religion? Is that a familiar thing to you? Yes. Okay. So
Yeah.
do you go there ever in moments of doubt? Do you ever start to re-examine your faith tradition and wonder, like, is there something there? Is it supernatural? Is something standing against me? Why can't I get the break?
I don't really blame it on God or
Sure.
whatever you want to call
Mhm.
it. Um, I usually blame myself.
Yeah.
It's a very social conditioning thing. And I'm very good at fixating on what's bad.
Hmm.
So when something bad happens, I tend to just turn it on myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Me too. Um, but then you talk about being whole. If you turn something on yourself, I don't even know if I'm using necessarily the words that I want to, but what's the rub right there? There's some kind of friction that's happening right there. If you don't have what you want, and you are doing what you should be doing to get it, what are you blaming on you?
Like, so if I don't have what I want
Mhm.
and I'm doing what I should be doing to get it, like why am I blaming myself or what?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I think it's just because it's how I was conditioned. It's what's easy for me. I'm good
Yeah.
at guilt tripping, and I'll add in to that arc of like self-blame that I tend to do a whole self-blame spiral, like a blame shame spiral, but then I tend to use like loving kindness towards myself to get out of it
Hmm.
and tell myself that it's not my fault, that I'm doing my best. All those things that
Yeah.
everyone tries to tell me.
Hmm.
Um, when I'm able to receive that love for myself, then I can kind of cut the crap with the blaming.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that really well. This is new to me. I've never tried this before. And when I say new, probably the last couple of years, but even more so recently, when something is not going my way, I take a breath and just say, like, you're doing what you need to do. You're okay. Nothing's wrong with you. And when I make a mistake too, those are big moments when I react out of frustration and I am short toward my kid or not a present for my wife or whatever the situation might be, stopping and saying, okay, I should do better next time, but I am not a piece of trash. That's a really, really tough, surprisingly tough thing to do because I feel like trash and then I spiral more and I make more bad decisions. That's a lifelong, always kind of thing for me.
Yeah, 100%. And I think so. One of the most fascinating things to me is in Buddhism, there's a metta is a loving kindness practice, and it's traditionally taught in the East that you give it to yourself first. So, like if you're sitting in
Hmm.
meditation, you offer words of loving kindness to yourself first. So, in Eastern traditions, Buddhism,
Hmm.
like all the branches of Buddhism and yoga were brought to the West, they found it was extremely hard for people in the West to put themselves first. They couldn't give
Hmm.
themselves love. And so in the West, it's traditionally taught that you give love to others first and you put
Hmm.
yourself last because by that time you've generated enough love that you kind of feel less awkward actually giving yourself compassion.
Hmm. That's an interesting, I've never really thought about the order of it before. I definitely resonate with, um, yeah, even when people say self-love or love yourself at all, I'm kind of like, that sounds woo-woo to me. I still struggle with that.
Yeah, well, and especially it's been so co-opted
Hmm.
by consumerism and capitalism. Like, self-love conjures up these images of like a bubble bath and a glass of wine, which are both two very, very nice things.
Hmm.
But I would argue not necessarily the kind of self-love that we need.
Yeah. All right. I have children to take to a baseball practice, so I would talk longer. I like the pace of this conversation. Usually, I don't have this kind of conversation on the podcast, and I really enjoyed it a lot. I would love to catch up with you again down the road and kind of find out where you're going. And give a shout out to your podcast. I know it's not quite there yet, but I certainly can link to your Substack. So for everybody who's listening, tell them where they can find you and how you like people to connect with you.
Yeah, you can find me at adultish. That's adult hyphen. Don't hate if it's an M dash or an N dash. It's one of the dashes. Ish. Adultish. It's on Substack. Yeah, just find me there, and you can connect with me at Camille Prairie, like Little House on the, at Substack.com.
Awesome. It was great talking to you. I'm glad we connected.
Yeah, me too. Have a good night and have a fun baseball practice.
Thank you. Yeah, have a good night. See you.